Hey everyone, Dan Johnston here. I'm the Jack of all Ministries, and today we are talking about soundproofing. So the reason I decided to do this video is I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about soundproofing. I remember when I first started playing in bands, I was a drummer, so everybody would come over to my house to play music and stuff like that. And I remember my parents would come out into the garage furious, like, "You guys are so loud, turn it down. You're vibrating the walls and the plates are falling off the shelves," and whatever. Like, they were so mad about how loud it was. So me being a genius, I decided to soundproof my garage by getting a bunch of old dirty mattresses and leaning them up against the wall. And to my surprise, it did absolutely nothing. And there's a reason. The reason is because there is a difference between soundproofing, or actually sound dampening, and absorption, or sound control. See, sound control, you can use soft things like egg crates or foam or mattresses or whatever, and that prevents sound from bouncing in a room, and you can kind of tune your room to it until it sounds the way you want it to. But sound dampening or soundproofing is different. This is something you do that actually just prevents sound from getting from one place to another. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at sound, and we are going to pretend like it is attacking us like a medieval army. Okay, so sound waves are not just one frequency coming at you, right? If you're playing a bass, it may sound like one particular frequency or note, but there's actually a bunch of overtones and stuff like that. And so you're kind of getting this whole slew of sound waves coming at you. So something like, say, a kick drum or a bass is going to have a lot more of the low-end frequencies coming at you, when if you're doing something more like a cymbal or like a flute or something like that, you're going to get the higher pitch frequencies coming at you. And so what I decided to do was I wanted to give us an army of sound coming at us, right? So this would be in the lower end frequencies, like we'll just call this, maybe like the 100 cycle range, something like that. Then we'll take the mids, and that'll be somewhere, 800, something like that. And this we'll call maybe the 3000 range, okay? So your lows, your mids, and your highs are coming at you with different strengths, okay? It is a lot easier to stop high frequency noises than it is to stop low frequency noises, which is why the lows are being called catapults, because they are a lot more destructive in terms of our sound barrier. And our swordsmen are still destructive, just not as much so. Now, the way that you change the number of soldiers in your army is increasing the volume, okay? So you can do that either by turning your volume up, and that brings all of your army levels up, or you can use your EQ, which changes the number. So you may say, if you turn up the bass, that only increases the low catapults. If you turn up the mids, you get more knights. If you turn up the highs, you get more swordsmen. So I hope that makes sense to you, to picture sound coming at us like an army with different numbers of troops, with different strengths in the different frequencies. So what do we do then to block this medieval army coming at us in terms of soundproofing? Well, just like we don't want sound going from one place to another, you wouldn't want your medieval army coming from one place to another. So let's say that this is you and the army is coming to attack you. What would you do? Well, basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about building a dam. And this will help us remember the steps we need to take, that they include decoupling, air sealant, and of course, mass. Those are the three things that we are going to try to do in order to protect ourselves from this invading sound army, if you will. And so what this looks like is, if this is your guy on the hill, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to want to add mass if you're defending against an army. So imagine for a second you're going to fortify yourself here and then have some flashbacks to Super Mario Brothers. All right, so this is what you're going to do. You're going to add mass. You're going to put a barrier between you and the sound that's coming after you, okay? And you want to add mass, not just absorbent stuff, right? The soft materials. You want density. You want mass. You want something to get in the way of those sound waves transferring through. The best things you can use are usually things like concrete, brick, things like that. But sometimes we can't afford to do that, or it's a little bit difficult to try to make that happen construction-wise. And so we use typical construction materials, but we try to beef them up. Okay, we might use things like mass-loaded vinyl or insulation or thickening up our drywall. For instance, I use two 5/8" Type X sheets together, sandwiched between either carpet glue or green glue with a layer of carpeting behind it and insulation. And so I had these layers of mass built up to block sound from coming through. Now, when you put up this mass, right, it's going to do a lot better job at stopping your high frequencies, like your swordsman, if you will, trying to come in through a wall. But a catapult is able to break through that, okay? So we need the densest, the most mass we can put in between to help us, okay? But it's not only about mass. If we look at our castle again, if this guy's standing here in the front door of the castle, and there's a wide open doorway, everybody can just come running through. And so the next thing we have to do is worry about sealing the air gaps, okay? So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to get rid of this guy here. And we're going to shut the front door, because we want to close any gap that could possibly lead into the room. I've heard stories of guys building, like a foot-thick concrete wall, and you can't hear people next to you, but then you drill through that wall to run a pipe or something. Even just a half-inch, 1-inch hole means you can communicate very clearly when before you couldn't hear anything at all. So small holes make a big difference. In my particular studio, the biggest air holes I had to worry about was the doorway. And this is going to be a challenge in any situation, because any room you build, you're going to want to get in and out of. And so dealing with a door that functionally opens and closes is a little bit of a challenge. So in my studio, I actually used 2 different doors. I sealed up around all the edges on both doors, and then on the outside door, I built the floor up so that when the door closes, it would close against it, so that there was no air gap on the bottom like you would have on a normal door. On the inside door, I didn't have a choice, so I put actually a seal that would actually lift and lower depending on whether or not the door is closed. And I also used solid core doors, because you don't want just flimsy door that has no mass to prevent sound from coming through. So the last thing that we're going to do here to protect ourselves is we want to do this decoupling idea, all right? We've all seen, fairy tales or read books or whatever, where a castle will have a moat around it, okay? You put this water barrier around the outside of your castle because it's hard for these soldiers to travel across the landscape when you have a river in the way. It's difficult to fight a battle. You're running after a guy with your sword and you hit this river and you got to cross that while the other guys are shooting arrows at you, right? So you want to put something that prevents transfer from the soldiers to you. Now, the way we do this sound-wise is there's a common problem called impact noise. If you've ever been in a basement or on the first floor when someone's walking over you, you've heard footsteps go across the ceiling. Well, what that is impact noise. Basically, their shoe hits the floor, which vibrates the subfloor, which vibrates the joists, which then vibrates the drywall and enters where you are. So that vibration is able to transfer from surface to surface. So what you want to do is break those surfaces apart and leave an air gap, because then the vibration going through solid materials has to find a way to jump across that air gap. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do just a little bit of an impact noise test, just to kind of show why impact noise works and what you do about it. Now, knocking on the door is about that volume. I'm going to try to knock exactly the same way every time. Now, when I knock on this board and it's not actually touching the door, there's actually an air gap. There you go. But when it touches the door, okay? All right. Now, I have these little sound isolating strips here. I'm going to go ahead and knock these on there and hold this up to the door and see what happens with a little bit of a soft buffer. We'll see if that even does anything. And so basically, in my studio, what I did was I built 2 individual walls. I had existing concrete walls on the outside, and I left a 1-inch air gap before I framed the inside wall. So any of those walls that were vibrating on the inside has to jump through that air gap to get to the next one. That prevents impact noise. On the ceiling, which was my biggest challenge because it was already existing construction and I didn't want to lower it anymore, I use something called resilient channel. And what this does is it creates a 1/2-inch gap between the drywall and the joist, and then it only makes contact where you screw it in. So if your joist run this way and your res channel runs the opposite way, only at the intersecting point is where the vibration is going to transfer. So all the other spanning gaps don't actually vibrate into each other because they're not touching. Okay? And so basically that's the way you want to soundproof. You want to make sure you have mass, you seal up your air gaps, and you decouple things like the frame, drywall, things like that. And there's a ton of ways to do all of these things. And so I hope that this video was helpful to you, especially if you're going to be building something like this, or building a drum cage at your church, or a cry room, or soundproofing from your neighbors that have an adjoining wall, or whatever the case might be. I hope this is helpful to help you think through things you may do to soundproof in your particular situation. And so that's going to do it for this video. I hope that it was helpful to you. If it was, I'd appreciate it if you'd think about liking the video and subscribing to my channel, because this is the kind of stuff that I like to talk about. And with that, I hope that you have a great day, and we will see you on the next video.